Which now brings us to some, the other one. After Dean we had trials, and whole books have been written about the poor methodology of those trials. Particularly Philip Sutton in Australia has written about that. We have modern studies, and these modern studies start in about 1980 with the work of John Colquhoun. And I'll leave you to read the book to find more details about John Colquhoun's work. He is one of the real heroes of this movement. So I'm going to look at one or two of these studies now. I'm going to begin with the National Institute of Dental Research, which is an institute which promotes fluoridation, supports fluoridation. And I think they tried to put this at rest, that this notion that you couldn't find a difference between tooth decay in fluoridated and non-fluoridated communities. So they looked at children, the teeth of 39,000 children in 84 communities. And an independent review of the raw data by Dr. Yamayanis, who was an opponent of fluoridation, found no statistically significant difference in tooth decay between the children who lived all their lives in fluoridated, all their lives in non-fluoridated, or children who lived in some time and the other. In fact, here are the three plots. This is ages 5 to 17, tooth decay, DMFT, tooth decay, measured across the board. The black squares are not fluoridated, the black triangles are fluoridated, and the open squares are partially fluoridated. It's a wash. There is no obvious distinction between those three lines. That is the biggest survey that's ever been done in the United States, and they found nothing. Oh, wait a moment. What they did is the official report of this data by Brunel and Carlos. They jacked up the sensitivity of the study. Instead of using decayed, missing, and filled teeth as the measure, they used decayed, missing, and filled surfaces. And as there are 5 surfaces on average on a tooth, there's only 4 in the cutting teeth, top 6 and top bottom, but on average 5. This jacks up the sensitivity of the measure by a factor up to 5. And with this in the bag, they then recorded that the average tooth decay in the fluoridated communities was 2.8 decayed, missing, and filled surfaces, and 3.4 in the non-fluoridated communities, and the difference, as you can see, is 0.6 of a tooth surface. So now we have the largest survey ever done in the United States, which has come back with a saving of 0.6 of a tooth surface. And as you'll hear in the next part of my presentation, we now have to put that in one scale pan, and in the other scale pan we have to put in the fact that this may be increasing our risk of arthritis, increasing our risk of bone fractures both in children and in the elderly, increasing the risk of lowered IQ, increasing the risk of lowered melatonin production, increased risk of bone cancer. We have to put that in the other scale pan. And I ask you, what human being with all their rational faculties would take the gamble of reducing the children's tooth decay by 1/6 of a tooth, 6/10 of a tooth surface, with the possibility that it might contribute to many of these serious, irreversible findings? Not many people would. If we had a vote on it after that information, we would overwhelmingly win this. But the course is, you know what's happened, and you know, I think, what's happened for 60 years. The average person has been kept away from this information. The average doctor, the average dentist, the average scientist has been kept away from this information. And they've been able to get away with it by just making very confident statements and not much else. If you think the 0.6 was rather low, the best that they got in Australia was between 0.12 and 0.3 of a tooth surface. And a subsequent study in Australia found no significant difference in the permanent teeth of children who lived all their lives in a fluoridated community and those children who drank rainwater or bottled water. None. In New Zealand, DeLeefter reported a difference in tooth decay between children in non-fluoridated and fluoridated communities, which he described as meaningless. And David Locker, who died earlier this year, found when he surveyed the world's literature that the magnitude of the benefits is not large in absolute terms, is often not statistically significant, and may not be of clinical significance. And there's been 2 more studies which are extremely important. One of the things which has never been controlled for in the vast majority of these studies is delayed eruption of the teeth. There's every reason to believe that fluoride delays the eruption of the teeth, and that means that you're looking at fewer teeth in the fluoridated community versus the non-fluoridated community, and by definition less tooth decay because there's less surfaces then to be decayed. Therefore you should take that into account. And he did a study, a big survey, very big survey in Europe, and found no difference in tooth decay once that was accounted for. And Warren, this is a study from Iowa, they have, I think it's the only study which has looked at individual exposure, looked at tooth decay as a function of how much fluoride children were getting, which is the obvious study to do. And once again, there was no relationship between tooth decay and dose of fluoride. So when I say the evidence for fluoridation is being effective, I mean it. It's extremely weak. And as I said, the best that you can come up with is it might save 0.6 of a tooth surface. There's 2 more things that really clinch this as far as I'm concerned. There are now 4 modern studies from former East Germany, Cuba, Canada and Finland that shows when tooth decay stopped, despite the claims of proponents, tooth decay didn't go up in those communities. And secondly, we're finding our worst tooth decay in America in cities which have been fluoridated for over 30 years. And it's because tooth decay is a function of income level, and we still have massive tooth decay in areas of low income. And therefore, the very raison d'etre for fluoridation is that you need to get this to poor families so you protect the poor kids is not working. Tooth decay is rampant in poor communities in cities which have been fluoridated for over 20 or 30 years. And at this point, I think this would be a good point to get some questions on the effectiveness arguments. And don't worry if there's not too many, we can... Yes?
Just one quick one, which is, can it be filtered out?
Answer is yes and no. If you use expensive equipment, if you use reverse osmosis or ion exchange, you can remove the fluoride. You will, of course, remove some other things that you might want, number 1. Number 2, it is very expensive. And the most that people can usually afford, if at all, is their water that they use for drinking and cooking. And the whole house reverse osmosis is extremely expensive and is only for those who have a lot of money. I mean, you're probably talking about £10,000 to do the whole house. Now, I think what you really were angling towards is that the common filters, like the Brita filters, the charcoal filters, do not remove fluoride. But now supposing you invest in this equipment, that still doesn't protect you, because you've got to worry about how much you absorb in a hot bath, number 1. You've got to worry about the fluoride that you're putting on your garden vegetables if you're a keen organic gardener. You also got to worry about when you go downtown, they don't have all these filters, so you're getting it in every glass of water, every cup of coffee, every cup of tea that you have at work, where you have in restaurants, and you have in your friends' houses when you go to visit them. So that's not the way to protect yourself. The way to protect yourself is what you've done this afternoon, is to come to this talk, get the information so you can share it with other people, so this scandalous practice can be ended as soon as possible. That way you're not only protecting yourself, but you're protecting everybody else. Yes?
We now have a new government, and the government ultimately will take responsibility. Do they know this information, and if not, can we get it to them, and can we convince them of this cause and get them to stop?
Well, it'd be wonderful. I mean, can you do this? Can you do that? One of the problems with fluoridation is you are a rare exception. You have an excellent newspaper here, The Echo. And that's going around the world. We have it. We get practically every article in the Echo is on our website, on the latest news, and people are reading that in New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, all across the world. They're reading what is being said here. It's very seldom that a newspaper takes such an interest in an issue and does such a good job in an issue and handles both sides of the issue. But by and large, it's very difficult for citizens to influence government on this issue. A, because in the case of England, they're as arrogant as you can get. The civil service knows everything. The people that promote this know absolutely everything. They will not listen to anybody. But be that as it may, we are limited in the influence that we can have until we get more people. It's a catch-22. Until you get more people, you can't get the key people to listen to you, the government officials, the media, and so on. However, that's why I wrote the book, because I'm hoping the book will help many more people to get informed, that more professionals will get informed, and then eventually, last of all, at the very end, because they don't like to read anything, will be the politicians. They rely on their secretaries and others to read everything and filter everything out. And heaven forbid, if in this case, when they rely on the civil servants, because the civil servants are absolutely locked into this practice. And if you don't believe me, look at what the Medical Research Council did in 2002. The York Review gave them many, many questions about what we didn't know about fluoridation. And then when the MRC reviewed this and had to determine priorities, they gave a higher priority on the study of dental fluorosis than they did on the study of the brain and the study of the endocrine system and the study of the kidney and even the study of the pineal gland, even though the key researcher in this area is in England, and they had a PhD thesis, and they were able to say it was more important to do more research on teeth than any of these other critical tissues in the body. And unfortunately, even with the new government, they still inherit the same bureaucracies, the same set of civil servants, and they've been peddling this nonsense for 50 years in England. Yes?
I agree with you. I think I'm against fluoridation. I particularly felt aggrieved by the sham of the consultation that was conducted by our local health authority. But I'm disappointed there's not somebody here to put the opposite case.
Yep.
And perhaps you could say, if you were in debate with somebody on the case of against fluoridation, what would what arguments would your opponents use?
Well, I will certainly try to, let me try as I go through here. We have different obligations, opponents and proponents, and I'm not trying to cheat here. If I were, I'll use an analogy. If they were building a dam above a village, right? The people that wanted to build that dam or in charge of designing and constructing that dam, they are obliged to know absolutely everything about the dam. They are obliged to answer every question, every possible fault in that dam. Now go to the other side. There are people in the village who've looked at this dam, and they're not qualified. They're farmers, they're peasants, they're whatever, school teachers, whatever. They're not qualified about dams, but they look at it and they say, I think I see a crack here. I think I see a possible flaw here. Now, they don't have to be experts on dams to have their questions responded to. The other side has to respond to every possible chink that we see in their armor, because in this case, if the armor is wrong, the village is flooded, people die. If they're wrong about their assertions that it's safe and effective, if they're wrong about safety, then children could have lowered IQs. Children could reach puberty earlier. Elderly people could have more hip fractures and so on. So there's two different standards here. They've got to be able to answer every question. We don't have to be on top of everything, although I've done my best to get on as top. Incidentally, I would welcome a full debate with anybody that's pro this case. And the only time I had that was on the Isle of Man with Professor Michael Lennon, the chairman of the British Fluoridation Society. You can watch the result on video. And all I can tell you is the end result is the Isle of Man was not fluoridated. But he's the best that they could throw at us, and we've been asking for debates all the time. They won't come forward. And not only will they not debate, but I have a strong reason to believe that they're not here, that they protect them. One of the protection against this evidence that we're talking about is never to hear it. They don't want to set up the discordance in there. But let me test it. Is there anybody here from the Strategic Health Authority. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Because the Strategic Health Authority is actually talking about spending £400,000 of